What's good, Gacha gang? Kawaii50 here. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe, and if you like what I'm doing here, be sure to check out the Discord, Patreon, and Twitch channel in the description below. My friends, we haven't talked about her on the channel yet, but with the recent tier list placings, the time has come. We have to talk about Caster Artoria Pendragon, recently released on JP, and recently topping the app media tier list, gaining a tier all her own in SSS, becoming the undisputed king of FGO. Now, of course, with this happening, a lot of people are talking about Castoria just completely supplanting all of the supports. Just there is no reason to use anyone else. You have to use Castoria. She is the second coming of Merlin. And while this is true to some degree, there is also, of course, the fact that the other supports in the game just didn't go away. They still exist, and they still provide a ton of benefits. So that's what we're going to go over today. We're going to go over the benefits that every single support provides in relation to Castoria and see exactly how these supports can help her continue to dominate in FGO. Because let's be real, gang, maybe you didn't pull a Castoria. Maybe you've only got your friends list to survive off of. And of course, we've got to figure out the best way to utilize this new meta queen. So, supports versus Castoria and supports with Castoria. Let's get started. And we're going to go ahead and start off by comparing skills. And of course, we've got to start with Castoria's skills. Her skill cooldowns are 6, 5, 6, so let's look what she can provide every 5 turns as well as every 6 turns. We're just looking at this with challenge quests, people. We're not talking about looping. Yes, Skadi and Castoria can loop when it comes to farming. That's its own separate discussion. We're not going to talk about it. So starting every 5 turns, Castoria is able to grant 20% NP charge and 30% NP gain to a single ally. Now, every 6 turns, she is able to grant 10% attack, 30% NP charge, so a total of 50, 50% arts effectiveness, 50% extra damage to threat to humanity enemies, and 1 turn of invincibility. So she not only provides a substantial amount of NP charge and following NP gain after using a noble Phantasm, but she overall increases damage with the art's effectiveness and attack, and on top of that grants a little bit of survival in terms of 1 turn of invincibility. So that's actually pretty great. It's not a party-wide invincibility like, say, Merlin, but it's still really, really good, and it will still protect your overall damage dealer. So how can we pair her with other different supports when it comes to, say, challenge quests, big event quests, things that require a lot of sustainable damage, not just farming? Let's go ahead and start by looking at the character I'm sure you all want to know about first, and that is Tamamo no Mai. Tamamo's got complete 5-turn cooldowns on all of her skills, and every 5 turns she is able to grant 50% arts effectiveness, heal 2500 HP, grant a 30% boost to party NP damage, and inflict NP drain on 1 single enemy. Of course, she does have a defensive skill on top of that, but it is only a single defensive skill, so we can overall consider that a dud. But let's look at how these stack. So when you're stacking some of these bonuses together, Tamamo and Castoria combined can grant a total of 100% arts effectiveness to your single ally. If you manage to use Plug Suit to swap, bring in, say, another Castoria or another Tamamo no Mai, it doesn't really matter which, you are going to be granting a total of 150% arts effectiveness. That is absolutely absurd when it comes to NP damage and when it comes to NP refund. So in terms of skills, using Tamamo with Castoria is actually a very, very good pick, and it makes a lot of sense because they share a card type. Just wish that second skill wasn't such a dud. It really needs a buff. Now, of course, let's see what we can get by combining her with the most overworked of the supports, and that is Waver. And we'll go by every 6 turns because that is Waver's longest skill cooldown. So every 6 turns after all of his skills cool down, you can grant an ally 50% crit damage, 50% party NP charge, 30% party attack, a 500 flat bonus to party attack, plus 30% party defense, and your party will also take minus 500 damage. Now, the big takeaways from this is with a Waver combined with a Castoria, you're going to be granting overall a total of that 100% NP charge. So if you have Waver along with Castoria, you can definitely charge up an ally's Noble Phantasm just super easily. On top of that, with Waver and Castoria paired together, you're able to grant your allies an overall plus 40% attack, which is going to help not only their Noble Phantasm's damage, but also all of the following damage afterwards when it comes to those Brave Chains and those extra attacks. The 500 bonus damage also doesn't super hurt, but overall it's just flat. It's not as huge a bonus as you might think. And of course, we got that crit damage coming in, but crit damage overall isn't gonna necessarily be helpful when it comes to refunding that NP gain. Yeah, it's extra damage, but if it was, say, you know, Crit Star Absorb or something like that, that would go a long way towards getting that NP gain refund. Not that your allies really need it. So Waver's still a pretty good pick when it comes to helping with that attack. And of course, some people are going to want to take a look at Merlin as well. Merlin, every 6 turns, able to grant 20% party attack, 20% party NP gauge, and is able to grant one ally plus 50% buster effectiveness, plus 2000 HP, and plus 100% crit damage. And there is, of course, on top of this, his single invulnerability skill. Now, the really interesting thing about Merlin, in my mind, isn't so much the NP gauge and the party attack. Yes, in general, you're going to be able to grant your entire party a total of 70% NP gauge for a single ally, that is, with the other party members getting 20%. And you're also going to end up getting an ally a total of a bonus 30% to attack, which isn't bad, but not as substantial as, say, we're going to be able to get from Waver. Waver edges him out a little more. What really is the most interesting thing you can get from pairing Castoria with Merlin is the fact that you are going to get those different turns of invincibility. So through skills alone, you're going to be able to grant your party a little bit more survivability, some real good chances to hammer home on that invincibility, and make sure that you keep your Castoria, and more importantly than anything, your damage dealer alive when facing enemy onslaughts. Of course, Merlin does have the buster effectiveness boost, so that is unfortunate. It's not going to really stack well with Castoria's arts boost. But they can still work well together when it comes to that NP charge and NP gain. So honestly, you could put either of them in either a buster or an arts team, and while it is not optimal by any means, there is still potential for their skills to mesh together in some minor ways. And finally, of course, we do have Skadi. Every 6 turns, Skadi is able to grant you 50% NP charge, 50% quick effectiveness, a plus 100% to quick crit damage, and is able to reduce enemy defense by 30% as well as enemy crit chance. Now, the interesting thing here about Skadi is, again, you are able to grant your ally that 100% total NP charge just from utilizing 2 servants. But after that, that's kind of where a lot of the help comes to an end. Yes, you get that defense reduction, and that is overall going to be able to help your damage. And yes, that quick crit chance is gonna be able to deal a little bit of extra damage, but you really need to rely on those quick arts characters in order to fully gain the benefits from this. However, if you are able to utilize those quick arts characters to their fullest, get some really good Brave Chains off of that 30% NP gain from Artoria is going to really help you when it comes to that refunding that Noble Phantasm game. So again, just like with Tamamo, with her arts effectiveness, the quick effectiveness you get from Skadi, and the intrinsic nature of quick cards being able to refund NP charge fairly well is gonna help you out. Now that we've got our skills figured out and we can sort of see how they're going to interact with each other, let's go ahead and move on to our Noble Phantasms. Now, of course, Castoria's Noble Phantasm is substantial like the rest of her kit, granting a total 30 to 50% attack increase, complete debuff removal from your entire team, and also a special status effect that offers complete defense. I listed it like that for the sake of brevity, but what this really does is it grants a buff called Solemn Defense, which nullifies Pierce, Invincibility, and damage, and you're able to stack between 1 and 5 stacks of this based on overcharge. It's really just an absolutely incredible defensive ability that they decided was somehow okay to stack on top of an attack boost. Like, that's fine. So since, of course, with Artoria's art's intrinsic nature, there's gonna be a lot of turns where you are chaining Noble Phantasms to gain an overcharge bonus. So let's look at the other supports Noble Phantasms and see how they're gonna sort of interact with each other, starting again with Tamamo no Mai's. Now, Tamamo no Mai's Noble Phantasm has a skill cooldown of -1 to your entire party, and on top of that, it recovers your party's HP by 2,000 to 3,000. What's really important here is the overcharge effect. The overcharge effect charges your party's NP gauge by 25 to 50%. So I would wholeheartedly recommend you chain Tamamo's Noble Phantasm after Castoria's, because not only are you going to get that huge bonus to attack from Castoria's and get that defensive boost, remove all those debuffs, but then you're going to be able to refund your entire party's NP gauge by, at the bare minimum, 31.25%. If you're using an attacker with this, I would definitely recommend you use Tamamo's last, because then you're going to get the biggest refund to your entire party's NP gauge, and that's going to be at bare minimum a 37.5%, at max a 50%. So with a 50%, if the skill cooldown happened to interact really well with Artoria's skills and cool them all completely down, you're going to easily be able to refund your damage dealer that other 50% and use that Noble Phantasm again without a need for a Brave chain. That's awesome. Now, looking at our man Waver and his Noble Phantasm, you've got a reduction of your enemy's NP gauge by 1, a chance to inflict curse on your enemy for 6 turns, and a chance to reduce enemy defense for 3 turns. Now, with the nature of Castoria's Noble Phantasm increasing your overall attack, I would definitely say this is a very, very good Noble Phantasm to place in the chain with hers. I would honestly recommend placing it first before you use Castoria's, so Castoria can grant your team extra stacks of that Solemn Defense, and the total boost you're going to get from using this Noble Phantasm isn't hugely substantial off that overcharge. You're going to go from a 30 to a 45% if you're able to reach overcharge level 3. Not really a super huge boost, and your Noble Phantasm that your damage dealer uses is going to be more than sufficient to take your enemy down a couple of pegs, more likely than not. So this is great. This is a great way to sort of start that chain, allow your Castoria to stack her Solemn Defense, and hey, if your arts damage dealer doesn't have a huge damage booster off of that Noble Phantasm's overcharge, you can go ahead and then stack Castoria's Noble Phantasm into the 3rd slot and grant 3 stacks of that Solemn Defense, which that's really, really strong. The next MP we'll look at in conjunction is, of course, Merlin's. Merlin granting 1,000 to 2,000 party HP every turn for 5 turns. He gets a 5% charge to the party's NP gauge, ending up at an overall 25%. And on overcharge, you get a critical star boost for 5 turns, 5 to 25 depending on the overcharge, and I've got the total values up there for you. Now, as far as this Noble Phantasm goes, what really brings it home is that critical star generation. The more stars you generate, the higher chance your damage dealer or your other caster has to crit, and on top of that, the higher chance you have to regain more of that NP gain. Of course, you want your main damage dealer attacking as much as possible, and if you're able to get out that damage, you're able to get more of that NP refund thanks to the NP gain boost from Artoria Caster's one skill. So definitely use any opportunity you have to overcharge this at the very end of your chain. At the very end of your chain, at a 300% overcharge, you're going to be getting an extra 15 stars per turn. And if you've got just a base fragment of 2030 on Merlin, let's go ahead and do the math there. That's 8 stars, so 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23 stars per turn. As you know, the magic number is 50 to get that complete crit on all of your characters. So if your damage dealer is high enough star weight, there is a very good chance they are going to easily crit. Merlin's Noble Phantasm is simple when it comes to helping Castoria, but it can be effective for your damage dealer. And finally, we've of course got to talk about Skadi's Gate of Sky. And overall, people, this is the Noble Phantasm that I feel interacts with Castoria the worst out of all these Noble Phantasms I mentioned. Of course, you've got the crit damage bonus, you've got the evasion, and you've got the instant kill immunity. But when it comes to that overcharge effect, all you're going to do is reduce party damage taken for 3 turns by a flat amount. If you completely overcharge that, that is a reduction of 1,000 damage, which is really substantial when you are getting hit by basic attacks. But if an enemy ends up Noble Phantasming you, odds are this is not going to be enough. If they're able to pierce through that evasion, they are just straight up going to kill you no matter what. So when it comes to overall interaction, I've got to say I rank this the least. If you're using Skadi with Castoria, I would chuck this in the front of your Noble Phantasm chain, because those stacks of Solemn Defense and whatever your damage dealer is going to be doing is a lot more useful than that flat damage reduction. Overall, my friends, I've really got to agree with the tier list verdict. Just the amount of things that Artoria Caster has in her arsenal is absolutely absurd. I've been watching the videos, I've been seeing the damage, I've been seeing even stuff people have been doing with the new Moon Cancer Kiara without any sort of class advantage, and it is clear that Artoria Caster, double Artoria Caster if you can, is the premier farming and one of the premier defensive setups even in the entire game if you are using Solemn Defense smart. However, just because this new kid on the block showed up, that doesn't mean that the other supports have suddenly become absolutely useless. That's not how meta works. These characters still exist in the game. If you're looking at a tier list, that is a completely perfect representation of the perfect account, with all characters completely max leveled, completely maxed out, all their skills maxed, NP 5, whatever. And you need to take that into account when you are looking at these tier lists. And the one thing I've got to say that is a huge point of contention is the fact that people are saying Tamamo no Mai is useless. That is just absolutely wrong. If anything, from what I think I was able to show by doing these skill and Noble Phantasm comparisons, Tamamo is actually the best supporter to pair with Castoria, and that is not just because of her 50% art effectiveness boost. She's able to bring different instances of healing to the table. She's able to bring a overall flat NP charge to your entire squad that allows them to get a leg up after all those Noble Phantasms have been used. And on top of that, skill cooldown reduction of a whole turn is very powerful, especially considering how powerful Caster Artoria's skills are. So I've got to say, if you've got a Caster Artoria on your friends list and you're really trying to figure out who you should pair with her because you didn't pull her yourself, if you've got a Tamamo no Mai hanging around, there is no reason to bench her just yet. She will do just fine. And of course, I want to know your thoughts on Caster Artoria as well, my friends, so go ahead and let me know in the comment section down below. Let me know if you're playing JP and if you've maybe paired her with any of these supports I have listed. Let me know how that's working out for you gameplay wise. Let me know what damage dealer you are using when pairing her with these different supports when not running double Castoria. And of course, if you are playing JP and you did not pull Castoria, or maybe you did pull her and you just still prefer using Quick as your farming method, let me know that in the comments section too. This is Kawaii50, hoping you all have a phenomenal day. I'll see y'all in the next video.